All right, Thibaut, all yours.
Hi, so my name is Thibaut Collat. Sounds difficult. I grew up in France and I went to school over there, studied electronics and automation and then computer science. I worked at a company called Carbon.com for 7 years, starting in '98. They do presentation software, so it was all Java based at the beginning. Even the output were applets, and then eventually moved to Flash, and then the application itself was all written in Java, starting with Java 1.1, 1.2, and so on. Eventually, I moved to a product called Violet Builder, Violet Central, which is like the on server-side Java. So I moved to that, and did that for a while. Now I work in a company called Pacific Coast Phaser. They do manufacturing of pillows and comforters and stuff, but they have an e-commerce platform based on SAP, and I work on that, which is not always fun. So the people using Java 1.4, that's us. SAP actually have their, they just made their own JVM so that they could stay on 1.4 a little longer. So but they are just released Java, a new version on Java 5 and 6, so finally it's going to move on, but we're not there yet. So, I came across Fantom about 2 years ago. I don't actually remember how I found out about it, but some article or something. And I thought it was a pretty interesting language, so I started using it a little bit. And at the beginning, they didn't have any ID whatsoever. It was just like VI. That's about it. So I decided to write a plugin for it on the NetBeans platform. That's how I got involved into Fantom. So I'm not actually, working on the language itself, but I'm quite familiar with it since to write the ID, you actually need to know a bit about it. Can you guys hear me well? Do you understand what I'm saying? So I have pretty strong accent. So. Okay.
You can speak in French if you want.
D'accord.
There won't be any questions.
And I can say whatever I want. So, Brian and Andy Frank are the two brothers that started the Fantom language. They founded a company in 1995 around there called Tridium that they do, it was all Java, and they do automation software and kind of a automation framework that's used by big companies for sensors and that kind of things. So when they were implementing their product as their clients, some of them were using Java, and some of them had .NET platform, and because of the kind of software it was with automation, there are a lot of concurrency type issues, and they were finding that Java was not always ideal for that, and they also had that issue of some companies that were on more of a .NET platform, a Microsoft platform, were not always willing to necessarily use Java. So they started writing their own language around 2004. Around 2004. Originally they called it Fan, though that was really bad for search engine SEO and stuff. So you search Fan on Google and you get anything but that. So eventually it got renamed to Fantom, which is a little better for SEO. Another thing they wanted when they started doing language, they wanted something that was fully object-oriented, because I guess they use a lot of, well, with Java and their software, they had to use a lot of primitives, didn't tell you like that. So, short history of Fantom. After they started, they started the language and they added the compiler. I mean, at first it was just their own syntax and it would go compile into Java bytecode. But because they wanted to be able to run also on some .NET platform, they changed that architecture and now it compiles it to what they call F code, which is like a bytecode, but it's a little higher level. And the Fantom runtime can interpret that F code into Java bytecode or .NET, or it could also interpret into other platforms. There are a few projects like running it on LLVM, and I think eventually you could add some other targets. You could, for example, somebody started running it on Android, so it's not really Java bytecode, obviously. So we ported it to that, and then you could also do it for target Objective-C if Apple lets you. So the main reason they started Fantom, it's really sort of out of frustration when using Java or C# that didn't exactly do what they wanted, or they wanted something better. So they sort of call that practical programming. I mean, when you use Fantom, if you've used Java for a long time, it's sort of obvious that they try to solve a lot of the things that can be annoying when you're using Java or C#. So it's not very. They had an article or a blog entry called, it's boring by design, because some people will say, it's not a feature, maybe don't look as exciting as maybe Scala or something. It's not like it's not an academic language with just features from there. I mean, what they have in there is things that are really useful. That I guess I'll show that a little later, I guess. So one of their primary features was that they wanted portability, so to the JVM or .NET. They also wrote their own APIs. So you use a Fantom API, and then at runtime it uses Java APIs or C# API behind the scene. The good thing about that is, since they wrote to the API recently for their language, in a lot of ways they are, a lot less cluttered and cleaner than what you might have with Java nowadays. I mean, originally it was fairly clean, and then it got more and more stuff in there. And nowadays, some APIs are, like the date time and the calendar stuff. You think maybe they should start that over. It offers, it has strong and dynamic typing. You can use either one. I would say that it's mostly, I mean, to me it feels like it's strongly typed, but some other people interpret Fantom as more of a dynamic language, so I guess really it's what you want it to be, because it offers you those possibilities. A feature that's, well, it's not unique, but that Java doesn't have, they have what they call mixins, which is a sort of like threads in Scala. So those are, it's equivalent to Java. It's sort of like an interface where you can have some implementation in it. So it's like an interface where you also might have some method already implemented that you can inherit. I'm gonna go in more details. All those points I'm gonna get in more detail a little later. So. Modularity. They have the unit of distribution is called a pod. it's a little bit like a jar file, but it's a little more modular. I'm gonna get in more detail on that a little later. And it's fully object-oriented, meaning there is absolutely no primitives. Everything is an object. So when you use Fantom, int, whatever, they are all object. But obviously, when it's at runtime, when it's on a Java platform, it will use primitive undercover when it's more efficient. It also offers functional programming, which I'm gonna also get into more detail. But the functional programming in Fantom is not. When you use it, it feels more like a feature than something you absolutely have to use. And I don't know if you guys have ever used Scala, for example, and it's very nice, but you really have to understand functional programming and know how to use it. And it feels like it's a requirement. Whereas in Fantom, it's more like an add-on, and it's easy to kind of start using Fantom without knowing it and learning it on the fly up. I didn't know much about Fantom functional programming before using Fantom, and when you can learn it like that, you don't have to, but you start using it a little at a time, and then it just becomes really convenient, and you're like, that's good about that. So it has some declarative programming where you can easily, for example, you can define, like if you define a list, you can, in your code, easily, have set values in it, and you can, they also support a lot of serialization, so that makes it easy to do declarative programming. Concurrency, I'm gonna get in more detail too, but they use actors like Scala, so that's probably the one thing that's very different for people that are more used to Java, because when you are used to work with threads all the time, actors are quite a lot different, but they offer a lot of advantages, and once you are used to it, it's more difficult with actor to write deadlocks and stuff. You have to be. It's a little higher level than working directly with threads, and it does a lot of the dirty work for you. So you don't have to be as careful with your each separate thread and multi-threading. It has support for generics, however, it's limited. They mostly have built-in generics for collection, because that's what it's most useful for. You might want generics for other things, but I guess that's one of the most controversial subjects, and they might still change that, because they are not really a 1.0 final yet, so it's still open for discussion. But I guess the way they see generics is that it's a good idea, but the way it's done, like in Java, often adds more complexity than is needed. So they kind of feel like it's a good idea, but it's hard to implement it in a way that is not, painful to use. So right now they made the decision to just have that, mostly for collection, where it's really useful. I'm gonna get in more detail a little later on that too. Syntax sugar, a lot of the code when you write Fantom code, even though it's strongly typed, mostly, it still feels a lot like writing. It looks a lot like Java, but at the same time, it's a lot more concise, so it can feel like writing, Ruby or Groovy or something like that. They have a lot of little things that makes it easier than, less boilerplate stuff than you will have in Java. one thing I like about Fantom is that it's even though it's a different language and it has a lot of features that you don't have in Java, at the same time it's very intuitive for existing Java programmer. I think you look at some code and most of it you will have a really good idea of what it's doing, whereas some of the same Scala or Closure, it's not always obvious for a Java programmer to know what's going on. Full stack is just it offers a lot of tools that when you get Java, it's pretty much just a compiler, and that's about it. Fantom has built-in things like logging and XML parsing and email. I mean, it has a lot of APIs that come with it. Usually with Java, you will need a lot of third-party libraries and things like that. It has like a basic, a small web framework built in, and it has a small server built in, like a web server. And it has something called FWT, which is their, I want to get in more detail on that as well, but it's their own widget toolkit. So it's built on top of Swing, but they have their own APIs, and it's a lot leaner and easier to use than Swing. They also have quite a lot of stuff for SeaJUG and SQL and all that kind of stuff already built in. So those were kind of like the somewhat unique feature of Fantom, but in the following slide I'm going to get into more detail about each of those things. So to get started with Fantom, you just need a Java 6 JVM, or you can run it on .NET as well. However, I think the .NET runtime is a little behind, so all the core works, but I think they are missing a few APIs also. So I would recommend using a JVM. So you just download Fantom to install it. This is for Unix, but basically you just extract it and set your path and you're good to go. So Fantom, after you install it, it comes with a few binaries. So fan.sh is a Fantom shell. So So the Fantom shell is kind of nice when you want to try, like if you want to play with Fantom a little bit, you cannot write a whole application in there, but you want to, you want to try expressions or whatever, do that. But so you can just evaluate expression and see what's going on. So it can be useful, when you want to test things quickly. When I'm talking about, since I'm talking about that, there is something called brand new. It's been out for about 2 days. It's called fanzy.net, fanzy.net. So it's like a online Fantom playground. So you can go type code in there and run it web-based. So if you want to play with Fantom a little bit without installing it, that's kind of nice. So yeah, in that find shell, you can try assigning variable, and you can try things. Well, it also has a kind of a small feature where you can use that scope command, and it tells you what's in your variable scope. So when you want to testing and see what you have. Fan is the main binary, the fan launcher. So if you write a a fan script, you use fan to run it. Fanty, that's a built-in tool. That's another thing that's built-in. They have a built-in tool for unit test. They have their own little unit test library. It's sort of like JUnit, so you can just write your own test. So, for example, you write a unit test, so you just have to write a test. That means it inherits the test class. I'm gonna get into the syntax a little later, and then it has built-in methods like verify or verify that it's equal or it's the same or things like that. So it's kind of nice to have all that built in, so you don't need to have yet another library to deal with that. FanP is something that I've never used pretty much, but once you compile some Fantom code, if you want to see what kind of bytecode it's generating on the JVM, so you can use that tool and it will show you what the bytecode is. So it's mostly useful for debugging, or I guess if you're curious to see what it does. So it shows you, I guess that's what it will look like on the JVM. That's just a small hello world function, so there's not much in there.
So that decompiles the bytecode into Fantom code?
So the FanP, yeah, it shows you what at runtime it will generate from. So you compile your Fantom code, it goes into F code, and then you can use that tool FanP to see what Java bytecode it will generate at runtime. So I mean, there's I barely ever use that, but there's a lot of options if you want to get more data. So that shows you a lot more stuff. But yeah, basically, I mean, you probably will never use that unless you are trying to, look for a bug or something, because, or if you really want to know what the JVM is gonna do, but it's not a tool that you usually need. And then Bootstrap, it's just that it has a bootstrapping tool. So what that's about is that you can use Fantom to compile Fantom itself. So Fantom is written in Fantom, and you can compile Fantom, which it can be nice if something is probably if you think there is a bug or you want to make your own version of Fantom or something, you can actually do that. So so Fantom code structure, the way they structure the unit of deployment, it's called a pod. So it has a unique name. So that will be, in Java you have your package, but here in Fantom there is not really such thing as a package, but you have a pod that has a unique name. So it might be called something like my company dot my first program or something. And then within that, you can put file in whatever folder. They don't have the same kind of namespace that you would have in Java. A pod also does its own dependency management. So in your pod there is a file called so for example here in my hello world, little hello world here. So I have my fan source. I just have a main method. I mean, I have a class I call main, and then I have a main method in it. That looks a lot like Java, except there is no args, but you can get the arguments through something called the environment that give you access to arguments and other things about the Fantom runtime and things like that. When you create a pod, it's just pretty much, I mean, so it's a folder with your fan source, and then there is that file called build.fan. This is a build script, but it also does the dependency management. So you give your pod name, and then and then here you get a list of dependencies. Usually you wouldn't have nearly that many. I have a lot here because I've got example about kind of everything. So you'll say, depends. Sys is like the standard Fantom that contain all the.
Are those all pods themselves?
Yeah, those are all unique pods, and those are all. Those are none of mine. They are all Fantom pods. So you got one for concurrency, and one for web, and one for Sys has all the core stuff. Usually, you might only use Sys, SYS. In this one, I have a lot just because I have a lot of examples and non-natural letters that use just about everything. So you can say which pod you're depending and then which version. When there's a plus, it's just if you say 1.0 or later, or if you want a specific one, you can say which specific one.
And if you leave the version out, does it just pick any one?
I believe you have to put one.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, you can put 1.0 plus, and then it will show over everything. One thing that's nice is that it makes it standalone, so a pod knows what it needs on its own. And when you deploy a pod, I mean, not when you want a deployment, but when you have a pod, you run your application, you can do, you can look up, what other pod have what dependency at runtime. So it tends to work kind of a lot better than a jar file, where jar files sometimes they don't really have any dependency going with them, so you end up with a bunch of jar files all over the place, and sometimes you have two of the same one and things like that. And in Fantom, it's easier because you can also you can query Fantom for what pods are installed, and find where they are and what version and all that at runtime.
So are you saying basically the pod has some kind of protection for its own dependency? So for instance, if you had a dependency on another pod that had a dependency that conflicted as far as the versions, that conflict is dealt with within the pod, right? Or it's not, it's shielded from the conflict.
I don't know if I would say it's shielded, but it's just because each pod knows its own dependency and you can query it. I mean, you can, and the runtime has a list of all the pods and knows all the dependency of all the pods that are in the runtime, so you can easily find what's going on if there was ever a problem.
But I'm not going to pick up a class that's, from the wrong version pod. If I have to find in my pod that I want that specific version.
Yeah, if you said you want one, the 1.2 version, it won't get it from 1.0.
So if compiler 1.1 depended on sys 1.1, but concurrency 1.0 depended on sys 1.0, which version of sys would you use? Would you use the version you declared, or one from concurrency, or one from compiler?
I don't know what happened in that case actually. It might actually. I'm not sure that they might actually give you an exception, but I'm not sure. Either that, or they just log them in whichever order.
Undefined.
But yeah, I'm not sure. You know, usually they try to do a good job of that kind of things, but I'm not sure exactly how they implemented it. Like I said, what I do know is that because you can query the runtime, it makes it quite a lot easier to find what's wrong if something actually goes wrong.
Does it prevent you from naming your pods the same as the system pods?
I think so. In theory, the way it should be done, like I call mine arrow, but that's a really bad example. It should be called, you know, like com.amdoc, or there's no dot, but com.amdoc, whatever project, you know. So you should keep the name unique. If you were trying to put two with the same name, I believe when you compile it, it gives you a warning, but I'm not sure. I tried that, but the name should be unique.
Question. So what's the output of creating this pod? I mean, you end up with a dot pod.
Yeah,
or
it's
something?
basically just a zip file, just like a jar file, so you can actually look into it. I can probably open
And
one.
how do you install it? You know, how do you put it in your runtime?
So with Fantom, it has a Fantom environment. So when you compile it, it puts it in there. So then you can find it by name. So if it was Colero, then you can run using that name. That's the basic thing, and it's possible if you have a bigger project, more complex, you can actually set up your own Fantom environment for your project. So like the Tails framework does that, so that you have no chance of, if you don't want to have any chance of conflicting with the runtime itself. So when you if I build the pod, see you see how it creates a file. I don't know if you can read that, but it creates and it installs it into the Fantom library folder.
Okay.
So what they call what they mean by compilation unit is so when you create a pod, you have a folder. I mean, by convention, you use a lot of convention oftentimes just to make it simpler, but you have a folder. I mean, you could change it, but by convention it's called fan. Though in the IDE here, it shows it fan source, but the actual folder name, if you look at it, is just fan. So that's where you put all your fan sources. Those other folder, well, I'm gonna get to that later. But so that test is where you put your unit test. Though, if it's up to you whether you put your test in the test folder or if you rather have them along with the code. That's fine too. You can do whichever. Basically, in your build.pod here, you'll see how I have the source DRs listed. So see, I have fan and I have test. So it's up to you where you want. You can create other folders if you wish. The build.fan is, like I said, that's the where you name it and put the dependencies, and then pod.fandoc is just it's like your when you have a Java package and you want to put documentation on the package level, it's the equivalent of that. So you can look it up later in Fantom. Types are so yeah, you have your pod, and then within your pod you have multiple source files. Now in each source files you can actually have multiple types. So types being a class mostly, I mean, or it can be other things. I'll get to that. But so here we have a class called main, but you could actually have more class in there. So you can put as many as you want, and they don't necessarily have the same name as the source file, but usually by convention they say, if you have a big class, it should have its own source file. It's easy to find, but if you have a lot of little class you use along with that one, it can be easier to just put them all in one place than having a lot of really tiny classes all over the place. But it's kind of your choice, whichever. So, so you can look up a type through reflection. So, for example, that's the type for a string. So, and then a type has multiple, they call them slots, but so they are methods. Basically, you can have multiple methods, just like in Java. Here, I'm going to look up through reflection the slots defined in str, which is the string in Fantom. So you can look them up. There's a bunch of them. So some of the, I'm going to get in more detail, but some of the concept of the type system is that it's purely object-oriented, so there is no primitives at all. Literals, literals are things like string and integer and float and things like that. In Fantom, there is, you have your usual literals, like so that's a string. Say you have that will be an integer, and so on. It has a few more unusual one, I guess, like something that's kind of nice of Fantom. They have literals for duration, so you can say 5 minutes, that's 5 minutes as a duration. So, instead of writing, 5,000 milliseconds or whatever, 30,000.
So what's the type of that? Can you do the type of that?
Right, like if you do duration dump type of, it's a class called duration, but you can convert that into a number. And you can add them together just like an integer or something like that.
So they have a units functionality in this? How does it know minutes? Is that specific to that class, or do they have that for measures?
In the case of, those are literal, so as you type them, it recognizes that. There's a few, it recognizes minutes, seconds, milliseconds, and hours and minutes and days, I think. And the duration class deals with that. So, yeah, it's like a unit, but it's just implemented. Usually, you'll have to create a duration object or whatever, but they have a literal for that, but you can just type it this way, which makes it kind of easier than saying new duration, because you could do it the more standard way, which if you did, if I get that right, but I think it would be like that. No. So anyway, so it tells us what. Oh yeah, I guess this one would be for. Yeah, but they have another way to do it where you can put the integer and the string. But yeah, basically, the only thing that's kind of unique is they have a literal for it, so you can just write it as is, and you don't have to always create a duration like I just did. What other literals? Let's yeah, show like a string. they do have you can do multi-line strings. I can't do it in so well, I'll get in more detail about the literals, I guess, after this. Fantom also has by default all types are non-nullable. So if so, it can help to not have to deal with null pointer exception and nullability all over the place. So by default, if I have my if I create an integer value 5 and then I try to make it null. By default, if you have a regular integer, like int, I guess I can talk about type inference, but the first one when I say I equal 5, it gives me an int, but I didn't actually have to say it was an integer. So it does type inference where it figures out that 5 should be an integer and assign a type for you. But it's still typed. It's not like saying Perl where it just doesn't have a type at all. So if I create that integer here, that will be already have one of those. So that one, I cannot assign null to it. And now if I want a nullable one, so I really want one, the syntax for that is you write it like this, integer, question mark, whatever type is a question mark. I can make it null. And by default, if you don't assign a value, for example, if I just do an okay, my what? In the shell, it doesn't do everything exactly the same sometimes. I mean, it does stuff the same, but it doesn't support everything. But what happens there though is actually normal, is because I said my int was non-nullable and I didn't assign a value. If I actually try to compile that, it will say you can do that. Anyway, what happens with when you have a non-nullable, by default it's non-nullable like int. By default the value will be 0. If you make a nullable with question mark, the default value will be null if you don't assign something. I'm going to show some example on that in the IDE.
What happens if you make an object reference
If what?
and don't assign it? Or if you make a reference to a non-numeric type, what do you get?
Yeah, like if you're in your code in the IDE, say you make a nullable object and it will warn you when you compile it that you are using the compiler will actually complain about it. So that's what's nice, because the compiler will catch a lot of those null errors instead of being a runtime error. So it's statically typed. So when you assign a type to something, it knows what it is. But if I have, say, if I do, so it knows it's an integer. This is all the operators like plus, minus, division and multiplication. They all just map to a plain function. So when I'm typing 3 dot plus 3, it's the same thing as doing, using a plus sign. So here I did a static call, just like in Java, but it also supports dynamic calls with this syntax here. So that will do the same thing, but it's a dynamic call. In that case, the compiler is not checking it, but you can make a dynamic call like you will do in dynamic language like in Groovy. But so, like usually I use mostly static call, but there are some cases where it can be useful to have dynamic call if you want to, like if you build like an object like on the fly, like maybe you want to call a method, like some method get created on the fly or something, and you want to call it that the compiler didn't know about, you can do it.
So like that method wasn't defined until runtime or something like that? Is that the idea?
Well,
Or for a mixin or something?
Yeah, it would be like a method that's not usually a method that you didn't have defined when you compile. So try to think of an example where you do that. I know, for example, sometime when you if you try to use some Java code maybe directly from Fantom, and you might not have the object type, but you know what it is, you can actually make a call like that to a function. I think they sometimes use it when you do some reflection type stuff. It can be useful. Some people actually use it a lot, but usually I stick to the regular static core because I find it safer. I mean, compiler will warn you if you make mistakes. Okay, implicit cast. Show an example of that. So, say I do. I have my so I have an integer, and then if I do so I get a decimal because it figures, I'm adding an integer to a decimal, and the result of that will be a decimal. So it can do implicit casting when there are rules, I guess, and when it does it, because it can also be dangerous, but they have a list of scenarios when they do it, and basically, it does it only if I guess there is actually a method that you could look at override that does, I forgot what it's called, but it just look at the two objects and match them and find what would be like the closest encompassing class, I guess. Basically, the use of that is just you don't have to do as much manual casting. You can use a lot of simple stuff. Right, and then if you do it on types that don't match, it will give you an error. So generics, like I said before, it's mostly just on list and maps. I mean collection in general that have generics. So, and then function also have generics. But other than that, like I know you cannot create your own generics, so they just have them in the collection. Kind of things. I'm gonna show some example of that. So. I'm going to explain a little bit more like Fantom statements. So you might have noticed I use that colon equal thing. When you assign a variable for the first time, you use that operator, which is the assignment operator. So they have a separate one for assignment, and then when you just put in a new value, you just use a regular equal like in Java. So the reason for that they use that is it's also prevents a lot of silly mistakes like you do a for loop and you accidentally set your variable to a new value and you wanted to check for equality or that kind of things. The other reason why they also use that is because since it has type inference, it needs to know when you are doing an assignment so it can find out what the type is at that time. So, like in the first case, I'm assigning a string, which is still name S1 to that value. The second one, it's the same thing, it's a string as well, but I don't have to actually say what it is. It does just type inference. So if you have a string or a number or any of the literal types that it does inference for, you don't have to deal with typing.
Will the editor tell you what types they are?
Right.
Like if you hover over
Right.
S2?
The editor, I don't know if it's 100% perfect, but it covers most cases. So see here, it knows that I have a string, and it shows you, string function like capitalizing and whatnot.
So does the equal operator get used at all then?
Yeah, so here I assign, I initialized it, define the variable. Now if I want to give a new value, you use the equal. So that's only used when you define it, I guess.
So if you tried to define it again, would it?
Right, if I did that again, it will complain, right?
Okay.
And then, this actually prevents some silly mistakes as well. And for type inference, they actually need to have a different operator so that they can know when you're defining a new variable.
So if you try to assign an integer to that, will that also complain? In other words, if the type is already
My IDE won't. It doesn't check on that yet. But Fantom would, yeah. Because
it's a string.
if I can do it, and then I'll just compile it.
When he was doing that in the shell, it was complaining.
'Cause,
Every time
yeah.
I tried to reassign it to a different type.
As soon as you initialize your variable and it does inference, the type is set. So it's not like it doesn't have a type. So if I try to compile that.
Will
see,
fail.
Build fail. Okay. So it's telling us. Oh, it's complaining about something. Another mistake. Okay. So see, and it's pretty clear error message as well. It tells you exactly what's wrong.
What other IDEs does it have support?
Yeah, I have a list at the end of the slide. I have a link. So I did Fantom first, and then I did NetBeans, and there's a fairly good one for Eclipse. That's some company called Xored, I think they're in Russia. Then after that, I think there is one for IntelliJ, but I'm not sure if that one has been maintained lately.
Earlier today.
What's that?
I tried it earlier today and didn't do.
To IntelliJ? Yeah, I think it's they haven't been working on it for a while.
It's 2 years ago.
Right. And so Eclipse NetBeans are the two main one, and then they also have like stuff for like TextMate and VI and then Emacs and that kind of stuff. So then they support regular for loops like in Java, like you will have in Java. In for loops you can do the same, continue and break type stuff you will do in Java. I'll explain some of the functional programming stuff later with a closure, but once you know how to use that stuff, you barely ever write a loop anymore. But it's there if you need it. They have the same switch case that you can do in Java. The only thing is instead of being just in Java you can only do it on like a number. In Fantom you can do it on basically any kind of object. So like in this case I'm doing it on a string. one little difference is, in Java you always have to put that break after each case usually, and oftentimes, I often forget, and that's not good. So in Fantom, by default it doesn't fall through, so you don't have to put any break. But if you do want two of them to actually do the same thing, you will put them 2 cases in a row like this. So that covers the case where you will not put a break in Java, which is pretty rare. I mean, usually you don't do that much. But and then there's default case.
So in practice, do people use that a lot, or is that a little used feature?
What's that?
Is the switch statement an often used feature or a little used feature?
I rarely use it, but because you can use it on any object, I guess it's a little more useful than in Java. I mean, I don't know. I guess if you were like maybe parsing some arguments or something, it might be useful. I mean, even in Java, I don't use that very often, but
It's considered an anti-pattern.
what's that?
Said it's considered an anti-pattern.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some scenarios where it's useful.
What if you wanted
Scala.
what if you wanted one of the cases to do some statements and then fall through? How would you do that?
Well, that's what this one. Oh, you mean you want to do? You
An
wanted to do
echo
some
or
stuff
something.
there
Some
on
statements
default?
and then fall through to the next one.
Yeah, I think it doesn't let you do that if it's that you'll have to do it twice and or call a function or something. Basically, I mean, I don't know. It's like you said, the switch case is rarely used to start with, and the false row is even more usual. So I know in Java, the few times I use a switch case, I often end up forgetting a break somewhere, and that causes all kind of trouble. So I think it's a sound decision. It doesn't have check exception like Java. I mean, I guess most new language are going away from that. So. But you can still do you can catch on-time exception. So that works pretty much the same as Java really. You can have try catch.
How is it determining scope in there? I mean, there's no basis. Right?
Yeah, it's
With the blocks.
yeah. Usually you'll have curly brackets, like here or like in Java. Yeah. But if you have only one statement, you can skip them. So
Oh, okay.
so if you do like a if or if else or try catch or any of those things, anytime it's just one statement, you don't have to put the brackets if you don't want to. So it just makes it a little more compact, and you might like that or not, depending.
What if you put an extra echo in the first catch block?
Then you'd be in trouble, right?
Yeah, it will not like that.
Yeah.
I seem to remember Java used to allow
what it will
try
say about-
catch without braces, and they changed it, I think, in 1.2.
I always just braces
So they made it a compile error if you didn't have braces around
Yeah, and
catch blocks, but previously you didn't have to.
it's your choice whether you put them out, because oftentimes I guess I'm used to it, so I still put them even when it's one line anyway. But if you want to be more concise, you can.
I suppose where that gets really fun is if you use nested try catch and get 2 echoes in, and then all of a sudden that's a catch for the outer block instead of the inner.
Yeah. Operators in Fantom, I mean, that's pretty much the same stuff as Java, plus minus, modulo, and so on. Like I said, one thing that's nice is they all map to functions. So if you look at the integer integer class, you will have a function called plus and a function called minus. I mean, there's a list of what they map to, but so does that mean if you wanted to override, you could. You cannot create your own operator like in Scala or stuff like that, but you can override this function if you wanted to do something special.
So does that mean you can create your own plus operator for a class?
Yeah, you could write your own. The way it works, I think, if you wanted to do add an integer to your class, then your function would be called plus int, and then you can make it do whatever you want. You can do that if you want. You can do So that's, you got the equality like in Java. You can do a cast. Ternary expression that exists in Java as well, so you get familiar with that.
Does the cast only converts numbers to other types of numbers, or does it represent?
Here what I did is A will be an integer. I casted it into a number which is not very useful, but number is it's higher level, so you got object number and then you get integer and float and so on. I might have one, might be more useful to cast it in float or something. This here, it's I don't see that exists in Java, but that would call the compare method. So on any object you can have a compare method. It's kind of like your equals in Java, but you have an operator if you want to use it. You can use it that way. That I've never actually used, but this one actually, compare like the, I guess, pointer, like
Identity.
the memory reference. I don't know when it's useful, but I suppose, I've never used it, but I suppose in some scenario I might need it useful. But they have an operator, well, a keyword called is and is not, so it just checks the type. So when you want to compare two objects type, you can just do that. And you can use as to do casting, which I guess you don't even need the parentheses, which oftentimes that looks a little nicer than the cast with the parentheses. One thing that's fairly nice is ranges. So if you say, like here, n0.3, that means that creates a ranges from 0 to 3. So let's see if I do, yeah, I probably already think I should just start. Okay, so that's a range from 0 to 3. And,
Does that have its own type?
yeah, that's a type range. But what's nice is you can, I guess that might look like magic a little bit, but I'll explain that in later on. But on each number in the range, I'm printing it out. I'll explain how that works a little later. So that's your range. Yeah, you can do a ternary expression that throws an exception. I mean, that could be sometime you want to check if something is null, just throw an exception. It's just a shortcut. So, like I said earlier, if you put a type with a question mark, that means there's a variable one when you want one. Here we have a type. This is a map. So that's a built-in type. So here I'm defining a map of keys being string and values being integer. So that's kind of nice in Java. There's nothing really like that, but you can define your map kind of like that in the fly. So I'm creating a map with two entries in it, key value.
Is that saying that the map variable can be null, or is it saying the entries inside
Right.
can be null?
Yeah, actually, it says in this case it says the map can be null. If you want everything
do
to be
that.
null, you end
Right.
up like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you do a null key though?
I was gonna say, if your keys are null, you got a problem, right? Because how are you gonna be able to
Sounds
find it value?
Well, yeah, you probably can't every time, but yeah. But
It does.
you could
Oh,
want
just
your
special version.
value null.
No,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yeah.
So you can use like a
Okay, and then one thing that's nice, it goes with so you can do a safe invoke. So when you're using a nullable type, if you try to use that on a non-nullable, compiler will complain. But if I have my map that I define as a nullable, if I do map.get, I'm using question mark dot. So what it's gonna do is that if it's null, it's not even gonna call it.
So then S would be null
So
after
yeah, S will just be null. Right?
that? Okay.
So it's kind of handy oftentimes. The only trick to it is I know at some point I saw that I kind of assumed that if the get call was null, it will not call the abs call. But I mean, you actually, if you put a chain, you actually want to do the null check at every stage of it.
Yeah.
Is that
'Cause
only
it's
if,
still
is that
calls.
only because the map can return null, right?
Because yeah, I
Get
mean,
could
because of that
return.
question mark, the map could be null, and then yeah, the map it was actually it had to be with a question mark like that probably.
Well, if
Yeah,
No.
Bob isn't in the map,
Yeah, you can always return.
right.
the
Yeah,
return
yeah, it
type
would be
get
null.
has to
Right.
be
Yeah.
nullable, right?
Because the get function, if you look at the definition, it returns the object nullable. So yeah.
So if you declare int as S, what happens if you look up Bob who doesn't happen to be in the map? Or just use the map question mark?
If I declare, what was that?
In, as opposed to in question mark. Like if that was
If it were, if S were not nullable,
yeah.
would that work?
Oh yeah, if you did str like that, it will complain as well, because it will say, I can't hide, but it will say, how it should. So see, it will say that I can't assign an integer into a non-variable. Well, that's the wrong type. Yeah, I have to make it an integer.
Didn't like that flip thing. You put
So see, it will tell you you're trying to assign a nullable and a non-nullable. Yeah.
But you could do the opposite, I'm sure, though, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
opposite is on.
Can you cast it into a non? Can you cast that and get an exception? I mean, if you right, if it's, I mean, could you
Oh, like
cast the return value there to the int? Yeah, is that valid?
so
Shouldn't
you want to
be.
do that?
Yeah, like I want you to barf on this.
It shouldn't be.
I don't think you will like that.
Yeah, so that works.
Yeah.
That was the other one. So okay,
Right.
you can do that, and then it will throw.
What it will do in that case, I think it will end up being 0, because I mean, it was null, but you're converting it to an int, which default value is 0.
It would mean no quarter exception it is 0.
I believe so, because I mean, int is not nullable, so obviously it can be null, and I think the values will be.
Does Fantom have a lint application yet?
A what?
That should be rule number 2 in lint application. The what do they call them in Java? The code style. check.
Oh yeah, they
Check
do
style.
have a page that's proper code style. I've never actually done that here, but it's probably not a good thing to do. But,
That's probably a warning, or at least it should be.
yeah, some of that stuff, when some people, what's good too is it's still pretty open. So when people find things like that they don't like, and you tell them, and oftentimes they'll add a warning, or if people agree. But they are pretty open and quick at making fixes and changes. When you have a map, you can do your map.get, but anything that has a get method actually, which you can make your own, you can call it this way. So I'm getting the values assigned to the key called John. So since it's calling the get function, you can make your own and call it that way, which is kind of nice. You can use ranges like that.
And then, could you have multiple types of keys for a map? So then could you have like a get method for by string and get method by
it probably
int?
more like the plus, where you say plus int with the type of plus str. So
Okay.
I believe you can do the same with.
Oh, okay.
I'll mention that in the documentation, it specifically states you cannot overload methods.
Oh.
So you can't.
Well,
have-
no, it doesn't. It needs a different name, right? So it will be called. That's why it's called plus
Oh.
int and plus
That's what
str.
I'm saying, you can't overload a method by having the same name. So you
Right.
can't have a get int and a get string.
No, get it and get
No,
string will
the
work.
only difference
Oh wait,
is the
get
type.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't allow overloading like in Java. The reason they don't do that is because they have really cool reflection features, and they just decided not to do that because reflection is way more efficient when you don't do that. And when you're used to it in Java, it seems like it's a must-have. It's really not a big deal most of the time. There's one time where it can be a pain is when you try to use Java code from Fantom, which I'll get to later. It can be a little bit of an issue. There's a way around it. An id block is something where I have an address class down there, or not? Okay. I have an address here where I define some fields, right? I have a street, city, and state. So an id block is, you can create an address like that and set the value within that block. It's part of, it's a little bit like a closure, part of functional programming, but
What's the difference between the first line and the second line? Is it just?
oh, yeah, you don't need to use it. It's well, if you don't, it does implicit it. So in theory, you will need to put it, which means you are setting that on the address, but you can skip it and it finds.
So it's the same as this?
It's kind of like this, but it's
Like that
not.
instead
Yeah,
of
it's
that.
more like that.
So
Actually,
if you need it for scope,
Right.
for getting rid of scope confusion, you can use it.
And they have some, when you use that, the cool thing is you can have an address like that, and then say you might have another one in there, or another address. So it actually is always the one within the closer scope, where this is more like the object. So when you put some within the other, you might actually end up using either one or both. But yeah, that's, and I guess when I go to the functional programming, it explains that a little more. So expression, I've done that. Okay, so in Java, the types you have classes, enumeration, which is like just like in Java, and then facet is basically an annotation. Mixin, which is like it's the interface, except you can actually have method implementation in it. And then inheritance. So I'm going to show that. For example, so here are some classes. I have a first class, class 2 inherits class 1. So that's how you do inheritance. You have that colon here, and then you can inherit one class, and then as many mixin as you want. So it's not like in Java where well, in Java you can also have multiple interface, right? But here you can have one class and many mixin. Keep in mind that this mixin can have implementation code. It's quite a bit more powerful.
Do you know much about the mixin stuff?
The what?
The mixin stuff, do you know much
Yeah,
about the details?
yeah.
We looked at, in Wingdings, we looked at the Scala mixins and everybody's head exploded. How the
Yeah, in mixin, they call them threads or whatever in Scala. And
they're simple until you subclass mixins with other mixins or other classes, and then you get the same function in two of them, and which one gets called first.
Well, if you paint yourself in a corner.
You can do that with Fantom, but I think it's not quite as complex as in Scala. I mean, it seems like Scala, they try to make everything as complex as possible. So, anyway. So you got your classes. Enumeration is it's a lot like an enum in Java, but you declare it like that. It's pretty much like in Java, but and then you use them like this. You can also create them. That method from str is kind of nice because you can create it from the value directly. Mixins. Okay, so it's an example of mixin here where you have your abstract. The thing with mixin is they can also have like that's a field. It has to be abstract. It cannot be a concrete field, but you can have a field in there. Like you couldn't do that in an interface, right? But like my television, which implements the mixin audio, it has to override. There's a keyword called override. Every time you override a function, you have to put override, which is kind of, it's not a notation, it's a real keyword, but it's kind of nice because it tells you when you do something silly, you mistype the name or something, because it will, if you try to override something with the wrong name, it will tell you and things like that. And then you have some method here that have an implementation. So, and see another. That's just a function that's also abstract. So in my television, I have to override them and implement them. So sometime in Java, you do either class inheritance or you have to choose, either interfaces or classes. Oftentimes you do interfaces, but the thing with mixins, they can prevent. Sometimes when you use classes, you have a lot of inheritance issues, or it's not very flexible when you move your code and stuff. And if you use interfaces, it's better. But then, say I have a television and a radio or something, they might have a lot of code in common. So you often end up with each interface and implementation might have some code that's duplicated, kind of. Whereas with the mixin, like those increment and decrement function, you can put them in the mixin and they are shared.
Did we do facets?
What's that?
Did we do facets?
Oh yeah, I skipped facets. Okay. Facets are like annotations, so you can create your own. So here I have it's kind of like a database facet called table, and then you just create fields that it needs like name and. See, this one has a default value. This one doesn't, which means it will be required when you use it. So here I'm using the facet, right? And that autocreate field, I have to define it. If I don't, same thing, compiler will complain. This one I could skip just because it has a default value. And it has a reflection, so it's easy if you want to find on the fly the facet. I mean, oftentimes when you put facet annotation, often you have to read them to actually do something with them. So an example here is that that little sharp, what do you call that? Hash, yeah. The hash is just a shortcut for type of. So I'm getting the string type, and on any type you can call the method as facet of any facet you want. So first you can find if it has a facet, and then you can get the value here to facet to get what the value is of it that was defined. And you can do inheritance with that, which I don't know if that's often used, but you can inherit a facet from another facet. Okay, slots are methods basically. So you have fields. Oh yeah, I forgot that. But in Fantom, all the fields they automatically have getter and setter. You don't have to always do a getter and a setter and call them. You just use it like it's a field, except it's actually calling the get and set method. So in the rare case that you actually want to do something special with a get and set, like here, you can actually do it. That's a syntax for it. So you put your field, and then you have that block that defines your getter and setter. And I don't think I almost ever had to do my own. I mean, in Java you always have to create a getter and setter, but it's kind of boilerplate really.
So if you call it from a different method, then you'll call
yeah, you just use
get
like
ID or
no,
ID.get.
You just use ID everywhere. You never have to use get or set. But when you do ID, it actually
calls the get and set.
method.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you don't make your own, it's just compiler just does it for you.
So you can't have private variables that can't be modified outside of the method, or class, or
you can. So one thing you can do is you can do that, where you will do private setter.
Oh, okay.
And there's a shortcut also where you can actually define a method as read only, and that does that for you.
Okay.
Another thing like read only, since I'm there is actually something that I think is kind of cool. There's a thing called what will be on a method, but there's something called once.
Did you say that if you
create the get and set for the variable that all settings and the retractions will go through that automatically?
Yeah, you don't have. I mean, usually you.
So you don't actually have to call ID dot set.
Right.
You say ID.
Usually you don't have that, and then you just do IP, but under the cover it calls a get method of
Okay.
IP and set method.
So kind of like an auto boxing thing.
Alright, yeah. So in the rare case where you want to do something special in your get and set, maybe you want to do an echo for debugging or something, you can do this here. That one thing I was saying is it's like a lazy caching. So if you create a method that's once, if it's you call it with a parameter, it will cache the result. And you call it again, it doesn't process it again.
Yeah,
So
okay.
that's like a built-in lazy cache thing.
And it's per parameter, so if you pass in a different parameter, it won't do it again and then cache the second parameter?
Actually, I think, I'm trying to remember, actually I might it down there. Yeah, I believe that you can actually not have parameters.
Oh.
it's not really like a lazy cache, it's more like a, well, it caches the result of that method and it doesn't do it again, but you can actually not put a bunch of parameters.
So
it doesn't.
if it depended upon, say, instance variables in the object, then they're going to be fixed at the time of calculation. If they change again and you call the method, it's going to
Right,
be the wrong result.
and the compiler, well, I think it doesn't let you actually use mutable stuff, because Fantom also has mutability, immutable and mutable stuff built in. So it does actually check for out of that.
Interesting.
There is a, well, let's see. Right, so you have static method, just in Java. This method is kind of a special thing where it returns its own type. But you know, like when you do a factory in Java, where you like say you have an object and you call it and it returns the same object, so you can call it chain it. But in Java, you actually have to put the object type. So if you do inheritance, then it doesn't really work. So there's that this key where we actually return whatever this is, which is kind of more flexible.
Harder to
Abstract.
break.
What's that?
Said harder to break.
Yeah.
All it takes is one of those methods to, return nothing or the
Aye.
wrong thing. and
Yeah.
screw.
Abstract is the same as in Java. Now, virtual, it's a method that has a default implementation, but can be you can override it. Because by default, if you don't, if it's not abstract or virtual, by default you cannot override it.
So it's like C Sharp.
Unlike in Java, yeah, like C Sharp.
Yeah.
So virtual lets you create a method that is implemented but can be overridden. Like I said, override, every time you override a method, you actually have to specify override. So it warns you if you either override something that doesn't exist or you don't use it when you should.
Does it support narrowing the return type?
Yes.
Override?
Yeah, you can do that. This one is kind of like the special one with the operator thing. So you actually have to put that facet on it. I guess that's another thing where it checks that you don't make, accidentally make one. So here I made a method plus int, and now I'm able to use, like my class here, whatever it's called slot. I could use slot plus 5, and it will call that. And use it to do the plus. It's like if you want to overload what your operator does, like the plus operator. So if I do plus 5, it will call that method called plus int. Type that I'm adding is an int. And you can do what you want with that. Internal, it's just something that it's like in Java when you have like a
Inner class.
yeah, you can only use it internally. Constructor, it has a little different syntax. You have to use a new keyword. So usually standard constructor is called make. So you have like new make. That's a little different than Java, but
They're more like factory methods.
right, yeah. And I think I don't know why they do that, but I think I don't remember what it's for though. It's for reflection or something. It's kind of useful.
So a second argument now says int age gets 30. That's the default value. If you
Right,
don't
so
provide it.
your argument can have default value, which is nice.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to pass all the parameter. I mean, if they are,
Yeah.
you pass whichever you want.
So you
like
could just
you-
press 1. You could just pass the name, and then it would
Exactly,
default to
yeah.
age 30.
Right.
Does order matter?
Order matters.
Shit. Yeah.
So does it do named parameters or?
Name parameters, yeah.
Yeah, they have.
No,
Well,
I mean,
they
when
have
I
name.
call it and I invoke it, can I do,
Oh, like when you call naming it? No, I don't believe it.
right, like if I have
Like
two?
JavaScript.
Well, if I have two with default values, then things.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't believe you can do that.
Can you have more than one make
Then what?
constructor? Can you have more than one make constructor?
Yeah, so the thing is because name have to be unique. That's
Oh,
another
okay.
constructor. And you can call them what you want. They usually, convention, they are called make something.
But they all have to be different.
That's why
right?
this one is made from SQL. They just have to have their own name. And then here I'm calling my constructor. So you can call them like a factory method, like I'm doing make, but the shortcut is just to use parentheses like you do in Java. Here I'm calling that one, that add alias one like this method where I'm shading it. That was just an example.
Somebody likes a little boss.
Yes. And then constructor shading, sometime if you want to call one constructor from another, the syntax is like that. So it's kind of like in Java, you just call super dot whatever, and you can use this and super. It's fairly similar to Java, except the syntax is a little different. Instead, in Java it forces you to put that super call on the first line. If you put something like complaint, so here you actually have to put it directly on before you even open your brackets.
Weird.
Well, I guess in a way, but I mean the way in Java where it forces you to put on the first line, it's kind of the equivalent, and it's kind of weird too in a way. So that's that. Okay, so kind of running late, I guess. So functional programming. Fantom has built-in functions. So I don't know how many. Are you guys familiar with functional programming or not really? In Java, there is no such thing, but the way you define a function, like here, this is a function, and a function in Fantom is an object. It's like an object like any other object. So here, what I'm defining is a function that takes two integers and return an integer. So what that function does, it just adds them together. You will think I should have return. When you only have one statement, once again, you can skip return if you want to. But so
Only when you have one statement?
I was going to say, doesn't it just return the last thing that was computed?
no.
Oh.
It only does if there is one. Well, returning the last thing that's computed, yeah, I use some language to that. Sometimes it's not necessary. You doesn't do what you want at all.
Okay.
It's an error. But usually myself, I usually always put the return keyword anyway because I don't know, that's just more clear, I think.
Yeah.
I can see making mistakes if you have a couple branches in the method.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes, it's not always a good idea. And then you can call a function like this. So I'm calling my function here with a list, the values 2 and 3. So you can actually call it with just like 2 integer, or you can call it with a list. You don't necessarily have to pass all the parameters. Like if your function, if you want your function to make some optional, like you have ABC, but you can call it with just A and B, and stuff, so on.
Doesn't C have to be have a default value then?
No, I mean in function you don't define. It doesn't define default value, but assuming you will want to do that in that scenario, you will have to cover for that case, I guess. So you can also call it yeah, it's the same thing 2, 3, and you can make shortcut syntax It's just to put in parentheses without the, you don't have to call dot call.
So what's the difference between the call list and the call?
They all do the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Call list is just that if you have multiple parameters and it does some kind of type stuff. So
Oh, so you're passing in the list of 2,
Right, 2
3
integers.
for the A value, and B is
right, it
null?
maps the list to the parameter
Okay.
automatically.
Okay.
Uh,
It just
uh,
happens to equal the same value of 5,
It will
right?
all do the same thing.
Okay, okay.
If you you can also I lost it. Okay.
Oh, the thing in the middle there is current in your function, right? Isn't
With
that
this
what
one
that's
here?
doing? Yeah.
Yeah, you can do function binding. So once I call my function 1 that's at 5, I can. The result of the function is another function. The function call gives you another function, so you can bind it to 3, to that, and then it makes a new function from it that
Yep.
just.
That only
gets
takes one
integer.
parameter, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Here I just.
So,
Yeah, what I'm doing there is just that methods are actually just functions. So any method you can actually use it as a function by doing .func.
so wouldn't that P gets 3 of 3 return 6 then, or?
No, because yeah, maybe.
Okay, because it's binding A to 3, right? And then you're
Function.
passing in B as 3 and it's adding them, right?
Yeah, it's probably 6.
Okay, okay.
6, that's right. So here I have a method that takes a function. So that's often what you will use function for. You make a method that takes a function and you can do some fun stuff with that. One of the most useful things with function though is that the thing called closures. So for example, and the standard library use closure and function a lot, and you don't feel forced to use them, but a lot of time it's very handy to use. Like here, I have a string, right, and they have a method called any. I have the definition here of any in the standard library, and it takes a character and it has an index, which is one of those like optional things. You don't actually have to use it, but you can if you want to know which one you're on. And it returns a boolean. So what it says, it returns true if any of the characters in the string. So it's gonna call the function for each character in the string, and applies a function to it. So my function here, I'll just look if the character is D. So what that will do here is that it will, for each character in S, like hello world, it will go H, call the function. The function say, is there a D in there? I mean, is it D, false, and so on. So the any function just is a function that lets you apply, a method that lets you apply any function of your choice, so you could check or whatever you want. So there are a lot of methods like that, and oftentimes it can be useful when it's a lot shorter than writing some loops and stuff.
So what made it possible to pass in?
This one will be, it returns a boolean, so I have a boolean that will be true because there's a D at the end.
Right. What allowed the type to go in? That's the function you're passing in is into bool. So it looks like it's defined into bool, right? So
Yeah.
what made the second int be optional in the function you're passing? Why weren't you forced to pass in the index? The index.
Well, see, that's one of those optional ones. Like I'm not using the index.
It's just defined it's defined in any as being optional as the.
Right, the function is defined that way, and what it does is that when it's calling that any method, the index is actually available to you. So that will tell me, it's character 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right.
And you might want to use it. In my case here, I'm not using it. But
Okay.
if my function was like, is there a D on the third character or whatever, then I might use it.
Surprised it's acceptable. Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I meant when I say they are kind of optional, but I suppose, I kind of see where, you'll have to be somewhat careful, I guess.
Any function of string takes a function taking a character and returning a boolean and does it or?
The characters in there.
Yeah, it's an int actually.
Yeah, those are the well, characters in the Fantom are integers,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
It takes, it any implies an or.
yeah, I guess you could say that. And there are some other method, you know, called like just find the first and stop after that, or things like that. So all over the APIs, they have a lot of like all, you know, will return true if they all match. Any, you
okay.
just want one, right? And like if you do each, for example, that's what I did earlier in the console over there.
Then
When
it
I
gives you
did
back
end
a
of
list,
each.
right?
What's that?
It gives you back a list if you do each.
Yeah,
Yeah,
each
right,
will
right.
call every single.
And it gives you back a list of results, right?
Well, it calls a function for each
Yeah, yeah,
character.
yeah.
So yeah, I guess. It doesn't return you. I mean,
I mean,
if
you get back multiple results if you call each, right?
Not necessarily, depends on what.
Well, it
your-
calls a
your-
function
your
for
block is.
for each character, and then it's up to you what you do with
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. So usually you call it like, you know, I mean by default like you will call it like that, but that looks a little ugly the first line. So then you can call it like this and put the function is the last parameter. You can take it out. Even if I had another parameter here, that's fine as long as it's the last one. But it looks even if there's only one, you can just skip altogether the parentheses and write it like that, which is quite a lot more clear. It also does type inference on those, so like here I'm just saying char, I'm not saying it's an int, but it finds out on its own that it's an int.
Do you even need to return for that?
That depends on your function. I mean, if you can have plenty of functions that don't return anything. So like the one I did, like that each doesn't return anything. So it's, I mean, it depends how the function is defined. If it requires a return, like it's not a nullable type, then you actually have to return something or the compiler will complain.
Could you, in that third one, could you get rid of the char and use it, return it?
Yeah, I
equals
did not show
the-
that example,
Oh, okay, cool.
but yeah, you can skip that. If there is only one parameter, then you can use that it, which is
Cool.
like the shortest.
Yeah.
So RET was kind of where I was explaining that if it's expecting a number, then you can pass it an int. I mean, it's, you know, as long as the type match, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, and you don't have to pass all of them. In the API, they use them a lot. So, for example, in the just an integer class, has a method called times, which actually takes a function. So you can just do like 5.times and pass it a method. So there's a lot of nice methods like that that are available for you to use.
So I guess the operator is called like multiply or something, right? To keep
Well,
it from getting.
I mean, no, times is not like it's not like doing a multiplication. It just say
Yeah.
You know, it takes a function. So if you look at it and it says
He knows what you're
five
saying.
times call that function. Oh, okay.
He's just making a joke.
It is a little confusing.
Depends how old you are, I guess.
So for
College
example,
is probably not confusing.
for example, here I have a list.
I know, we're running short on time.
Yeah.
One of the things that you haven't touched on is the interoperability with Java code.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that's probably more interesting to.
Yeah, you guys could. Yeah, so it has built-in serialization, like very easy to use. The whole code can be serialized. I mean, I have all those things online, so you can actually look, and if you go over the question mark, there are more details. DSL is something where you can write your own little class or syntax. Okay, so
Could you,
I
could you
think-
go into the Java interoperability stuff?
yeah, I'm trying to get to. Did I skip it? Okay, I went past it. Where is it? Okay, here we go. So I'm gonna show a few examples of that. So Java and Perl. So you can use Java. The only thing that's, I don't know if I showed that before, but when you want to import a package, you do using you know, using email or whatever. So when you do a Java package, you just do it like that. So here I'm importing the regex class of Java. Here I'm importing file filter. And you can redefine the name because, like, for example, I use file because Fantom as file too, so it will clash, so you can rename it. So once you import it, you can use it like if it was a Fantom object. So see, I imported the regex package. So when I'm using pattern here, it is the Java pattern class, and I'm just using the methods on it. You can call it just like it was a Fantom object. That's a DSL actually that I was talking about, but so I'm just calling Java regularly. You can use dynamic call if you wanted to, like if you didn't know, or I mean with Java, I don't know when that's useful, but.
And if you imported the file and you didn't rename it to JFile, when you were using it, could you just use a fully qualified name for it?
Yeah, I believe you. Well, I think you can with Fantom type, but not with Java type,
okay.
Because because it will look a little.
Okay.
Yeah, but the few times that file is one of the only one that I could think of. But, you can subclass a Java class, like here. So I'm subclassing the file class, and I'm calling the constructor of the Java class here. You can implement a Java interface. So and you can even use Java annotation if you wanted to. I'm sure when you will want that, but you can. So one thing that's interesting here is that here I'm using my JFile, right? And when I'm calling, like for example, dir.listFile, that's just a list file method of Java, right? So it returns me a list of JFile, but I get a Fantom list of JFile. So I mean of Java file, but the list itself is a Fantom list. So what's nice with that is now I can actually use the Fantom method on it, which has a lot of functionalities. You can do right. Oh, here I just implemented a file filter, Java file filter. So see, that's one of the interface. That's an interface. That's the interface method you have to override, so you can override it. I have a list here, kind of like at what if the primitives. If you get like a Java integer, it will become a Fantom int. So by default, all the Java types become nullable types because Java can be nullable, obviously. And it will map list and maps in Java to list and maps in Fantom. There is a few things that it doesn't. You cannot. There's a few restrictions. Like I think if you subclass a Java class, you cannot subclass it one more level, which is a little restricting. So there's a few things to be aware of, but I listed that in the slides too. There's one more thing I guess about Java interoperability that I should show is that what is that? You can so there is that jar dist env target. So you can there is a, I show you that build.fan, and there is another build thing called build jar or build jar env. What it does, if you use that, you can build your pod or collection of pod. It will build it as one jar with the whatever Fantom runtime stuff it needs, so you can actually use it as a plain jar in a Java environment. You could also call Fantom code from Java because I mean there are some kind of defined rule of what the class will be called. So usually, if you have a pod called mypod, once it's running in Java, it will be called fan.mypod.myclass. So if you wanted to use it from Java, there is some rules as to what is going to be called. Then I won't get over that, but it has all the concurrency actor stuff, kind of like in Scala. and it has a lot of built-in features, logging and localization and dead time, really easy to use in Fantom. And the Tails framework, I don't have any time to demo it, but it's a framework that was made recently on top of Fantom. It's very nice. It's a little bit like maybe like Play or like the Play framework or Ruby on Rails, but it's just a very easy to use framework where you just write, you write your code. You don't even need to compile it. It compiles on the fly. It tells you if there is an error, and it takes advantage of Fantom features that I don't have time to show, but I'll show you just a little. What's that? For example, just one minute. So it's kind of hard to explain quickly, but in your Fantom code here, it's using a client DSL, one of the DSL things. So what all it does is it marks this as client code. So when it's compiling, this code is actually JavaScript code. And you can also have SQL code that way, and what's in client will be executed on the server side, and what server is executed on the server. So you can have your do some Ajax all like in one file, and it's pretty neat. If you have any error, it shows you exactly where on the fly. If you go to tailsframework.org, I have the link at the end. They have a really cool video demo that's like 15 minutes that shows all that.
Okay.
There's a lot of things I didn't cover.
Yeah,
but if you look at the end, I have that presentation online. So if you click it, it's all web-based. So that cool thing is just in a browser, right? So you can go look at it. Like I said, there's more details, and then Fantom.org has a lot more information as well.
Okay.
The examples that you've been showing were from.
Right. I have it here, wiki.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you want to just send me any email with the presentation slides and all that stuff,
Right.
I'll send it out to the folks on the mailing list.
Because there's a lot of things I didn't cover, but
Last questions, I guess? Yeah.
So I'm curious if, most of us, I guess, are Java developers here. If you were to sort of say, this is the easiest road into Fantom would be to.
right. You might start. One thing I like about Fantom as a Java programmer compared to, I've used like Groovy, and I try to learn Scala. Groovy is all pretty much all dynamic types, and or Ruby or stuff, that kind of stuff is all dynamic type, and I prefer statically type myself. I like the compiler safety, I guess. But then you get like say Scala, and Scala is, it's very complex. Personally, I believe that the programmer masses are not ready for that. Fantom, I don't know, I didn't show much code, but it reads a lot fairly easily for a Java programmer, I believe. So you can start using Fantom fairly easily, even without using the functional programming. And then I didn't know functional programming, but I started liking those each method and stuff like that, and using them and learning on the fly. What you will use it for, you could start using it for like scripting stuff, and like a lot of time when I do some kind of script task build kind of stuff, it's way faster to write in that. I've used the Java interaction as well, where I've done I don't have time to show that, but it has really cool JavaScript feature. You can write your code like you're writing a swing application, and it will compile to JavaScript. That's a huge feature I couldn't show, but
Nice.
So you have it's like Swing, but it's much, because of the it blocks and the closure, it's more compact, and then you can run it in the browser in JavaScript, which is really cool.
You said that some IDs are supported better than others. Is there ones that are?
Right. So there's a list here. NetBeans one is the one I did. It's not perfect either, but it's got a lot of features. I hear the Eclipse one is pretty good as well. The IntelliJ is kind of obsolete, and also saying they are not really IDs, but they are syntax coloring in VI Emacs, whatever. I would say, NetBeans or Flix, or NetBeans or Eclipse if you want a full ID, and if you like a lighter thing, all those things are fine.
A question about the Java interoperability. If you pass a class or a map from Java to Fantom, is it the same object in Fantom being wrapped?
Yeah, it's just your
Fantom
pure Java class. I mean, it's exactly the same. So
But
you call the same methods.
But is it the same data? If you change that list, is it the same list that you had on Java, or is it making a copy of the list when it comes over to Fantom?
No, yeah, it's a live reference to it. So
It's a library,
right.
okay, same
Yeah.
object, and you can pass it back, right? If you have
Yeah.
a Fantom list, you can pass it back to Java.
Right. So like in my case, I use some SAP libraries that connect to a backend. So they have a Java library, and I've used that from Fantom to do like a UI tool, like in Java, like I don't know, writing swing in Java is very painful in my opinion. I mean, I prefer server side myself. I'm not a UI person anyway, but like Fantom has really nice UI library, so I made advantage of calling, using that little library, and it works pretty well. I mean, I guess there is a few trickiness with those method overrides when you're trying to call a method that's overridden in Java and they have the same name. It's a problem. So in that case, what I have done is like make a small Java class that wrap it under another name or something. They might actually, I think they either fix that or might fix it. They were gonna do something about that. But for the most part, it's pretty easy to use Java from Fantom.
All right, any other questions? I guess with that, we'll call it a night. Thank you, Tipo.